Okay,
Hi,
so...
yeah. Hi, I'm Brenda Chapman.
And I'm Steve Hickner.
And I'm Simon Wells. And we've never actually done this before, but we're just going to talk our way through what happened on this picture while we were making it. Actually, while this is going on, we ought to mention that one of the big stars of this film was Hans Zimmer, who wrote the score, and of course the songs by Stephen Schwartz.
Absolutely. In fact, Stephen really got the movie going with the first song, Deliver Us.
Yeah, that just sort of planted the movie straight off. We knew kind of the flavour and feel of the whole thing.
Yeah, in fact, we were so worried after we got in the first 6 or 7 minutes of the film done, trying to live up to that first 6 or 7 minutes for the rest of the film was a little intimidating.
Mm.
These credits and the clouds that are coming up were...
They're done by Conan Fitzpatrick, and Patrick Whiting worked on it.
Yeah.
They're actually they're paintings that we then manipulated digitally and moved around in scene planning.
By Robert
Yeah.
Crawford was working on them with
But
them.
our art director, Richie Chavez, designed this incredible sets of clouds that were ended up painted and morphed together.
And actually trying to deliver it and make it work. Was
Yeah.
I think it was
Richie, what have you done to us?
Yeah, I think it was the first thing that was started and the last shot cut in the movie.
Yeah.
And some of the stuff that you're seeing in the prologue here came out of the visual development that went on for about 6 months before we started production proper on the picture.
Yeah.
A lot of visuals, like that first thing with the SETI head, was actually a painting by Paul Lesane, who went on to be one of the heads of background.
Mm-hmm.
And he just did it as a development piece, sort of here's an idea. So a lot of these things were stuck together from those, and also Marcos Matau, who went on to work in layout, created a lot of these visuals.
Like especially one of these shots coming up. Marcos did that, this one.
Oh yeah.
And
This one
Richie
came-
Chavez did a lot of incredible stuff in here too that the story artists really ran with.
This sequence was the first sequence we went into production with, and it was really sort of a shakedown for the whole studio, trying to get into the style of the characters and trying to find out what the kind of look of the picture was going to be. Also get things like the 3D and 2D stuff working together. That big statue that just went through was one of the very early 3D pieces, with 2D artwork scanned onto a 3D model and then integrated with a 2D background.
Yeah, this was my training ground as a director, I think, going through the effects and all of that. I know Steve Woods, one of the effects artists, was one of the first scenes I had to approve, and the incredible patience of the effects department for this sequence was amazing. My hats
Notice
off to
the
them.
transparent guards that go through there. It was one of the things we never fixed, was a couple of the guard shadows are actually rather too thin, and so it looks like there's a couple of transparent guards.
This is where I'd like to mention Lorna Cook, one of our story artists, who, in her storyboard, she did this entire section with Yocheved and the kids all through Goshen, and she gave us a heck of a time because she drew this beautiful woman that was, you just felt the pain and the love and all of that in these simple story sketches. Trying to find a character design for this particular woman was really difficult because we were trying to match those story sketches.
Yeah,
As
smash
close
the
as we
feel
could.
and yet fit it within the style that Carter Goodrich had created for the characters.
Yeah.
And still look like Moses, because she had to look like his mother.
Yeah, had to be a
Yeah.
family resemblance running through.
So it was a tall order, but I think Rudolph,
Rodolphe Guenedin.
yeah, he pulled it off.
Yeah.
I can
We
never
always
say
had-
his last name. I know what it is, but I just never sure how to pronounce it.
There's wonderful subtle things which the animators carried through here, like the small breeze that's blowing all the way through this sequence.
And remember, Sergei had just had a baby when he animated this.
Oh yeah. Yes, he actually had a 3-month-old baby, so he was literally
Yes.
drawing his own child.
Yeah, which
There were
happened
lots
to be
of-
a girl.
There were lots of babies on the movie, including Brenda's soon.
Oh yes, if Brenda
yeah.
if Brenda drops out during this commentary, it's because she had to go to the hospital. You're about what, a week away from
Yes.
popping?
Yep. I didn't think I was going to make it on the drive over here.
So you're seeing a 3D basket integrated into 3D water with 2D ripples and a whole painted background, which then has the 2D animation dropped into it and some sort of 3D manipulation of the 2D animation in order to create things like the shadows. It's an immense amount of layering of different techniques. I'm sorry, Brenda, go on.
Yeah, that shot of the Nile was one of the first shots we had done of what we could do with just a simple background and throwing the 3D sort of technique over it, and it was shocking how
Yeah, when
how
we first saw that
real
in
that
colour.
was.
Yeah.
it
Paula
was-
Sane did that close-up of Yocheved, and
Oh.
everybody fell in love with it.
Yes, there's one drawing, and poor old Rodolph, who animated it, must have animated that scene 66. He must have animated that, what, half a dozen, 8 times?
Yeah.
And then we went back and forth. Is she going to have tears? Is she not going to have tears? And she finally ended up with...
With
With
tears, and
tears.
we ended up doing the most complicated tears you can imagine. That the tears actually have 3 or 4 elements. They have a shadow, a highlight. There's the hard part of a tear and the soft part of a tear that's up against the skin. That's the sort of run down the cheek. Oh, coming up the 3D.
Poor Doug Eichler, those curtains. I gave him such a hard time on those curtains, but he pulled it off.
And then anytime anybody had to touch the basket, it became a problem.
Because the basket would be animated first, and then the 2D animation. Well, we kind of worked it 2 different ways. Sometimes the 2D animation was done in rough first, and the basket was then kind of fitted in. But then the cleanup animation, the final line animation, had to be adjusted to fit every movement of the basket. It's a real headache.
But backing up, just this sequence in general, we were trying so hard to find the style of the film, the style of acting, the style of how we wanted to animate the reality of the movements or the.
Oh, we went back and
we
William
had to
reanimated the part of Miriam, didn't
Yeah, we had to reanimate. Actually, Bob Scott ended up reanimating
Oh,
it
you're right.
because we sort of went over the top with Miriam. She was a little too cartoony in our first approach. Beautifully done, but it just didn't fit into the rest of the film very well. So
Yes, and when we'd done about half of the rest of the film, it became apparent there were a couple of scenes that just didn't quite.
yeah.
Oh, this massive end shot, which is
Paula
is-
Sane's.
yeah, and
Photograph.
Harold Kraut's masterwork of 3D 2D integration. All these slaves are actually sprites. They're 3D images that have then been turned into little 2D cards, animating away, stuck into a 3D background.
And this shot was always really controversial because people didn't understand why we were still looking at Egypt, and the lyrics of the song were singing about the promised land. And the idea was we had such trouble with the idea that the promised land was so close. Why didn't they just go there to begin with if we were showing that? So we showed the palace where the baby Moses was, the guy who was going to take them to the promised land if no one else got there.
Yes, he was the deliverer who was going to come.
But we knew we wanted to show Moses in a different way than people would expect. That's why we chose to show him in a chariot race as a young man.
Yeah, originally we'd had Moses as sort of the meek follower of Ramesses, the big show-off and arrogant, type guy, but it just didn't quite work that way. We were just having.
Well, the trouble is we
We
liked
couldn't-
Ramesses too
yeah.
much, and Moses was kind of this boring, wet end that was just coming along with him, and we didn't like him. So yeah,
So we made Moses the troublemaker and giving him all the
But also
mischievous qualities. And,
on a deeper level works as the guy who has no responsibilities at all, the prince who has all of the privileges and none of the
yeah,
responsibilities.
he's got the free ride basically.
And he's going to become the man with the greatest responsibilities.
Whereas Ramesses, we wanted to play him. He's got the responsibility of this tradition of thousands of years of Egyptian pharaohs weighing on his shoulder, his father's being overbearing to him and really pounding him. So he's, he wants to have fun. Moses is his sort of release valve and confidant, but he's a very serious young man.
One of the things going into the film we wanted to really work on was not having just a straightforward villain who was just evil. We wanted to understand the motivations of the villain and even feel some sympathy for him. It's too easy just to have the dark character who, does lousy evil things.
Yeah, and Ralph Fiennes really helped us with that a lot, because even in his angriest moments you can hear the vulnerability in his voice, and he really gave us a lot of cues on how we could play Ramesses.
Yeah, I actually remember the first recording session when we started getting that stuff and we started realizing, boy, that there are layers to this character.
Yeah, he raised the
Yeah.
bar for us. It's like, uh-oh. he's
We have
really
to dig
good.
a little deeper here for this character.
Why do the
Now we get
gods
into
torment me with
what
such
Jeffrey Katzenberg described as the father who's telling his kids off for having wrecked the family car. He's not actually really angry at them for the things that they've done. He's more upset because they could have hurt themselves.
And their lack of responsibility. I mean, just the fact that they weren't thinking about the greater picture.
Christoph Saran really did a terrific job with SETI on this. He really moves like an older man. He has real screen presence and charisma, his SETI.
Christoph went on to supervise the older Moses, but almost all of SETI is actually his hands-on animation.
This is, I think you, Simon, and Kelly Asbury worked on this sequence. You
in
know,
story.
writing it and,
Yeah.
and getting it succinct and how the scene was going to play. And it's pretty much verbatim what the boards were.
Yep.
Even those rough story sketches of Kelly's, it's pretty much the same kind of staging and everything.
Do you remember that horrible sketch that Kelly had done? He'd like run it off in
Poor
about 10
Kelly.
seconds to throw it into the reel, and it ended up being in the reel for about 3 years.
Yeah,
That one
it
and the
just-
one
it
in the-
stayed there. He would,
The Taskmaster thing.
yeah.
where Ramesses and Moses, that sketch.
Somehow it's always the horrible story sketches, the really rough ones that stay in for the longest.
But Kelly does do good story sketches.
He
Let's
can
give
do,
him
yeah.
that credit.
It's just that wasn't
This
one
was
of
just
them.
a really rough one.
This BG
Poor
coming
guy.
up is spectacular that Paul did, the Vista of Egypt. That was so nice.
Sort of a long conversation scene.
Moses,
Yeah.
you will
Yeah.
never have to
And notice the
carry
water in the background again. It's one painting with just some 3D effects
allow himself to be led
thrown on
astray.
top. Stephen Krath, I believe, did that.
There's a lot of little subtle things, like there's a very slight highlight on the edge of the characters, which actually is created by offsetting the animation and adjusting the color model on that offset. But just all those kind of little details which people worked so hard to throw in, and I think generally you don't notice as you watch the film, but they add to the sort of feel. That's
The
there.
animators
But even-
rarely get a scene this long to animate on. Usually we tend to cut quicker.
Yeah, we tried to breathe in the scenes.
This idea for this scene, the water balloon thing, came from Jeffrey's misspent youth.
Yeah, living on Park Lane, throwing water balloons down on passers-by.
Yes.
It's been great.
This is sort of a pre-sequence to to a later scene in the movie that Ronnie Del Carmen sort of inspired with.
Yeah, the ultimatum when Moses goes back to talk to Ramesses after the first 9 plagues.
Yeah, and it was sort of setting up where the brothers would go. That Ramesses has his little hiding place where he goes to try to
Which
sort
ironically is
things
actually
out.
in the lap of his father.
Yeah.
And so we wanted to sort out early on that this was kind of a habitual thing that he would do.
Steve Martin and
Moses.
Martin Short gave us priceless dialogue in this scene, of which we were only sadly able to use a small
we had a couple
fraction.
of great sessions with those guys, and they're hilarious, and they would ad-lib and just build on each other. And you didn't want to stop them, but you knew that they go on for about 3 minutes, and you knew that you were only actually going to use 2 lines.
Yeah, they're incredibly funny.
This was Sergei's idea, the spinning the wig as just sort of a little gag that Ramesses can do.
Well, he was
because he pointed out that, in the desert montage, we had Moses take off his wig and throw it to one side. And he said, people are going to be scared that he just tore his hair off. You've got to show that they're wigs. Boy, do you remember, Steve, you cut this sequence. We had the
This
whole
was a
banquet
personal
sequence.
torture. This one.
Yeah, this banquet sequence was in the movie, and it used to be like 6 minutes long or 7 minutes long or something. And we had all this story material that we felt was really important and had to be in there. And it would always look good in editorial, looking at the sequence. And then we'd look at it in the movie as a whole, and it always felt too long. And so we ended up just saying, it's got to be 2.5 minutes long. And Steve, you took it into editorial and hacked the hell out of it.
Yeah, I said, what if we just start in the middle of the scene so they come right in when everything's already happened? And it seemed to work better.
But there were so many other things you cut down as well. And
I
at
think
first
that-
we thought, no, you've ruined it. And then we saw it in the movie as a
No, it
whole.
works. Yeah.
I think this is the only scene that we were able to, with SETI, do the Nemesis.
Oh,
With the
the
stripes.
whole that
This
blue and yellow crown
this
cover.
whole sequence, I mean, because with the Queen's headdress and everything,
Yeah.
it was all effects and cleanup. Really had a. I mean, it seems like a simpler sequence, but actually, with the lighting, sort of this dramatic lighting and the glinting off the metal and
All the detail of
on
the
the
costuming
detail of
and
the
so on.
costumes. Yeah.
Rudolph did
It
a
was a
great
tough
job.
one.
Oh,
With
on
Zipporah.
Zipporah, yeah. It's also the immense animated crowds, which are actually they're groups of repeated cycles.
Wait,
that,
Steve.
Yeah. You want to talk
Our
about that,
hats
Steve?
off to Steve.
Well, they're just reused a whole bunch of times. We made these pods of cycling people so we could keep it busy, so it wasn't a bunch of held cells, because there's nothing worse than that in animation. And whenever you cut to the crowd, nobody's moving.
However, we also had to make sure that nothing happened in the crowd that was too obvious that you'd see it repeated.
I think Scott Wright did a lot of these.
Also, like the subtlety of the color in this sequence. The color model group and the background people work so closely together to get the unified look. You know how the characters blend into the background as opposed to popping out like a bright colored cell on top of something.
And to get the
It's-
feeling of richness without it becoming gaudy.
Yeah.
Remember, at one time, Samut, the helper there, was a big character, and eventually he became you there. His character was
He lost
slightly
his name.
diminished. But he
Yeah,
was
he
going to
was
be...
Moses' best friend.
Yeah,
so-
and then we said, why should there be this character who's Moses' best friend? That should be Ramesses, not some guy who works in the palace.
Yes, we also had difficulty of why wouldn't he go with Moses when Moses left, or at least when Moses came back and took the slaves out of slavery. Why didn't this guy go with him?
But we went down that whole track for a little while of that traditional animation formula of the sidekicks. You know, Moses had 2 dogs, Ramesses had his evil cat.
And that's what's left of the 2
You know,
dogs.
that's
There are
their
2
2 dogs. And that's it. I think they show up in a scene later, but it all just sort of diminished when we really wanted to just spend the time with the main characters.
Yeah,
we found that we...
Yeah, watching it, it just we weren't interested in unless Moses and Ramesses were on screen, which actually was kind of a good thing. We were relieved to find that. I don't know if a lot of people watching this may not realize that the way in which animated films are built, there's an animatic, which is rough story sketches put to temporary sound and temporary voices and temporary music. And you watch that whole thing, the whole movie plays.
It's called a
There's-
story reel, yeah.
Yeah, and then it's gradually replaced first by line test and then by finally by color. So we get to watch the movie hundreds of times during the making of the picture, which it gets quite tedious after a while, actually.
But we know it well at the
This
end
is-
of 4 years.
This is one of the few sequences where we actually got the 2 actors, Sandra Bullock and Jeff Goldblum, together. And they were great fun, but they gave us a scene we did not expect.
Yeah, we were expecting this heavy, dramatic piece. That's how we had originally done it in the scratch recording and conceived it. And they came in and
They're
put humor
well,
in
they're both
it.
natural comedians,
Yeah.
so they sort of started throwing in these little extras.
And we started panicking a little bit.
Yeah, I was
like,
like, oh, no.
Tone it down, oh gosh. And then we sort of let ourselves sit back and see what they were doing and realized they were making it so much better.
Yeah, their instincts, in particular Jeff Goldblum's instinct of throwing in these little things, actually it raised the drama, if anything, rather than...
Yeah, we still got
Diluting it.
our straight take of the sequence, but we ended up going with theirs.
Yeah. And
Bob's-
Sandra has this great way of going back and forth between being dramatic, but yet then the next line or two she'll deliver it with a humorous edge to it, but yet you still feel that fear, the need behind what she's saying, and it was very
I want to
layered.
mention Fabio Lanini, who animated Aaron. Bob Scott did Miriam,
Miriam.
but the Aaron Fabio actually came to us and said, you know, how much of the Jeff Goldblum stuff do you want in this character? Because he'd watched the tapes of Jeff recording the dialogue and wanted to get some of those mannerisms and very peculiar things that he does into
Remember,
the animation.
he didn't want to do the job, Fabio. He didn't think he could head up a
Yeah.
character. Of course, he turned out to be
Mr.
spectacular.
And as with Miriam, the thing is, Bob is so much like Miriam. Bob Scott, our lead on
I don't know if
Miriam.
he'd like you saying that. But
No, I mean in personality and
Yep.
just the sincerity of the person, as well as pulling in Sandra Bullock, you know, who has a lot of that quality too. So it's a nice blending of the pairing of the animator and the actress. It was just
And James Baxter did a great job on Moses in the sequence.
However, at this point, we're going to embarrass Brenda because Brenda is actually the singing voice of Miriam at this point. We actually originally, we did it as Scratch. Brenda was the voice of Miriam in Scratch when we were building the story reel. And, you know, unsuspectingly, she sang this little piece of the lullaby. And we went back and tried to re-record it with Sally Dorsky, who sings Miriam's part in When You Believe. And somehow it just never came over the same. It didn't have the same emotional content. And so we all elected that Brenda was going to stay in the picture.
I was outvoted.
Yeah.
Yeah, there was just something about that moment when you did it that we could never quite recapture.
That's because I had to make everyone leave the room, and I was a nervous wreck just because Nick Fletcher, our editor, was in there listening to me. So the
Well,
shake in my voice is
Simon's debut is coming up. He'll get his.
So this is actually another subtle 3D background behind there. Very often we try to use the 3D stuff so you didn't really notice it too much. We didn't want to showcase it. We just wanted it integrated with the overall look of the picture.
we wanted to use it to be able to move the camera and make it feel much more dimensional and like using live action camera as opposed to just the normal flat camera approach to
Like this is 2D.
animation.
Yeah, it was actually a sort of artistic choice here, which was Derek Gogol's suggestion, was that within the Egyptian world, things fall into a very two-dimensional and very structured design, whereas outside of the Egyptian world, in Goshen, where the Hebrews live, or out in the desert, it all becomes much more organic.
Death dogs again.
Yeah. Don't blink. That's the other Moses' sidekicks in the picture.
Oh, the hieroglyphs. We ought to mention Hani, who
Yes.
our resident Egyptian, who had studied hieroglyphs in Egyptian art school for 3 years and had been convinced he was never going to use them for anything and had complained bitterly the whole time he'd been studying. And then he found that, in fact, yes, this job did require him to teach us all
He
about the
spent-
design and use of hieroglyphs.
Especially in
At least
this
2
nightmare
years of
coming
his
up.
life, yeah. 2 years of his life.
In fairness, to
Using
him,
it.
we have to admit that we did break some of the rules of the hieroglyph. Like, for instance, hieroglyph eyes would never actually touch the edge of the eye surround and
And
things like that.
hieroglyphs
And they never
don't point.
Yeah, like right there.
Sorry, honey, we made you do it. This is also actually the work of Dave Moorhead, one of the scene planners, to build this whole, taking 2D animation and placing it into the 3D world.
Susan Zitka did a
Yes.
lot of the character animation. in
Yeah,
this.
she did a really good job.
All deliberately stylized to move in this peculiar and stilted way.
I mean, it's hard in animation sometimes to realize you're in a dream sequence, you know, and you know when you've got one drawing style going to another drawing style to make it really clear. So we had to really be specific in how we wanted to stylize this, because even in the real world in this movie, the Egyptians have a hieroglyphic look to them in their design, so we had to be pretty graphic in this.
This was
is,
a
of
honey
course-
pose.
Yes,
Yeah.
this is of course the replay of the events of the prologue. We went through a lot of different versions of this dream sequence, trying things that were much more abstract and dreamlike, and eventually tied back into something that was going to be a very clear reminder of what we'd already witnessed.
So we could in the prologue, we tried to keep it a little vague as to what was actually happening to those children, and this way we could find out with Moses, the horror of it.
And be reasonably graphic about it whilst
Yeah.
not actually having to show real babies
But-
being hacked to pieces.
Yeah,
I think
but wanting
that-
to be with the character.
Scene with the torch was one of the first ones ever animated of young Moses.
Oh yeah,
Yes,
running
Steve-
up to camera. Yes.
William Salazar did that.
And that beautiful scene going down the hall, Steve Woods did that whole lighting.
And I
It
think
was
Steve
beautiful.
Horrocks did the animation on.
Oh, and we ought to mention the amazing flicker effect, which you don't really understand what's difficult about it, but the light parts of the picture actually lighten and darken, and the dark parts of the picture do not. So the result is you get a very real sense of light falling on the background.
From a fire flicker.
Yeah, which was a creation of Steve Krauth in effects.
And a little bit of Jane Gotts in there too, isn't
Oh
it?
yeah.
Maren, we went back and forth in this sequence of whether or not how sympathetic Seti was going to be on this.
That's right. He was.
And we finally decided that we had to make him a little bit have a more of an edge, and that's when we added the last lines.
Oh, my son, they were only slaves.
But I think a wonderful, subtle piece of acting on both
Williams,
characters.
yeah. There's another one of those glints on that medal. I kept asking for that over and over again. It was poor effects department. Can I have another glint, please?
Moses.
And the Queen here, done by Dave Brewster,
Really nice.
Beautifully done.
who
He
went on to
really-
do the older Ramesses as well, supervise. Then there are subtle things, like I don't know if you noticed, but the lily pads in the background are actually moving up and down very slightly on the water, but the lily flowers are not. They had to be separated off, and the distortion that's applied to part of the background didn't apply to them.
Why did you choose me?
We didn't.
This is. I think the Queen is really beautiful here. Dave Brewster did a wonderful job. I think he really thought about his mother a lot when he was doing it, and he always wanted the Queen touching Moses because it's what his mother always did when she was trying to comfort him. Was always
Yeah,
constantly
there was a
touching.
strong emotional connection for Dave.
And Helen Mirren did a beautiful job with the voice. But Linda Shane,
Yeah,
I believe
she's
is
the
her name,
singer in this.
just seamlessly went into the
Astonishing
song.
match. Trying to match up voices of the speaking and singing parts. Some people can do both, but usually you're looking for a singer who can match the actor that you've picked, and that can be very tricky. We literally listened to hundreds and hundreds of voices. Or rather, actually, I guess Mary Latta listened to hundreds and hundreds of voices and
We
then
got to
brought the
hear
best
5 or
ones to us.
6.
Yeah.
I'm not merely going to restore this temple. I will make it more grand, more splendid than any other monument.
Remember when Kelly first pitched this sequence, we were a bit unsure whether having the nose be the thing that Ramesses was standing on might be a little bit
Was it going to be
cartoony.
too silly?
But it was subtle enough. I think it worked okay.
A lot of the slaves in the background here are actually 3D
3D.
Yeah.
slaves.
The foreground ones are 2D and the background ones are 3D, yeah.
And actually trying to find a technique that would make the 3D slaves look like 2D painting was quite a tricky thing. And also trying to get the styling so that that just the drawings themselves look like Carter Goodrich's and Carlos Grangel's designs.
Well, that was we had animators actually come in and learn how to use the computer to do
Oh yeah,
that.
2D trained animators learning the 3D techniques. Oh yes, my debut.
Yes, you're
Yes,
coming up.
It's coming up.
I am the old slave voice.
Remember, at one time, Miriam was the one who was hit.
Oh
and
yeah.
not this guy, but we later on changed it to Hebrew to
It's
keep
actually
more
that was
like
one
the
of the
Bible.
things where we had a large number of religious consultants involved in the film, and one of the few things that
There's Simon.
There he goes.
Yeah, we tried recording that with about 5 different voice artists, and none of them sounded old enough, even people who actually were
Yeah.
the right age.
We didn't have to
Always
actually
sounded too
hit Simon, though.
cartoony.
Yeah, I just screamed my lungs out for 15 minutes. But yeah, the thing about Miriam, that originally we thought, hey, it'd be great if it was Miriam being attacked by the slave master and and Moses would defend her.
Yeah, as
And
a
then-
personal connection, it's like giving him
Yeah,
a
and
good
then there was a
solid
whole
reason.
group of rabbis from the Reform right the way through to the absolute whatever it is, traditional rabbis, and they all agreed. The only thing, in fact, they all agreed on was that it couldn't be Miriam. It had to be some anonymous Hebrew, because Moses is feeling a connection with his people, not just with his family. And we
But-
realized that that actually led us to thinking differently about stuff that came before and stuff that came after.
Well, it also wasn't just his people. It was just seeing a stranger being treated like that, realizing that all of these were people, because not all the slaves are Hebrews. You know, we went to a big effort to try and show that there were a lot of different races in there, and it was just showing his compassion for humankind that we realized we'd missed the point when we tried to use Miriam.
This turned out to be a very emotional sequence.
Yeah, SETI used to be in this sequence, and it would divided it too much.
Yes, we found it had to be about the brothers. And do you remember, we went back and re-recorded the sequence several times over, because we'd recorded it initially with Val doing Moses, Val Kilmer, and then we went and recorded Rafe being Ramesses, and then we realized that there was an emotional context that we had to go back and re-record Val, and then we found, it went back
Yeah.
and forth.
Yeah.
Oh, 3 or 4 times.
They were
And then
troopers.
eventually, actually, Val wanted to re-record his stuff because he realized there was things that he could do that
Yeah.
would sort of amp it up a bit further.
Yeah, the poor actors, it was really, I think, hard for them to understand what, how animation is done, because, they understood they'd done the scene before, so they were trying to figure out why we kept having to re-record, and, the closest thing I could come to explaining was that this is more like workshopping a play as opposed to recording a script.
Yes.
It's a constant source of reworking for the 4 years that this thing is going. And it's hard because they don't have the other actors there with them, they don't have their costumes, they don't have the environment to put their
Actually,
head
on
into
if you
it.
remember that sequence, Nick Fletcher developed a technique of having the Ramesses lines on his computer so he could fire them off
Yeah.
with the press of a button,
Mm-hmm.
so that Val could actually have someone to respond to.
Yeah, feel the emotion of what was coming from the other actor. But it was really hard.
This conceit
But-
came from Stephen, this idea here in this sequence.
Oh yeah,
Of starting Moses big in the frame in the upper left and getting smaller and smaller in the environment and moving eventually to the bottom right of the
where he's
screen.
completely engulfed and dwarfed by the environment. The land literally swallows him up.
Yeah, we also talked about with him, having these images of Ramesses, in the desert, the pharaoh head and the faces and that kind of thing. But then we started thinking about what this sequence really is about, and it's really taking Moses to his lowest depth. It's not about Ramesses, it's about
It's actually about stripping
Stripping
away
him.
everything of Egypt and
Yeah.
everything of being a prince. We ought to mention Steven Spielberg
Yes.
here. It's a terrible name dropping to just use his first name and assume everyone knows. So here he is, literally stripping away all elements of being a prince.
And that ring gave us a lot of trouble because for you Laserdisc owners who will go back and make sure in every scene that he's wearing it once he gets it, I think he is.
And there's the scene that would have shocked the world if he'd just ripped his hair off, but thanks to Sergei.
This was it.
Doug
Cooper did
yes. Yeah. Amazing sandstorm.
that. Uh-huh. I think we have a few,
Yeah.
most of our jokes coming up. This
This is pretty much it for jokes, yeah. That actually got a laugh. I was amazed when we started screening this to groups of people that the dissolve to his hair sticking out would get a laugh. And then we realized, oh, of course, we were originally going to have other tufts of grass, and it just looked like one of many tufts of grass. And we somehow forgot to put in the other tufts of grass.
Yeah.
There's things like that sand pushing away from around him when he gets out of digs his way out, which are surprisingly complicated things to do technically, and match them into the background. But they look completely seamless.
this scene gave us a lot of trouble trying to register all the effects to get it just right.
You know, being able to see through the water and get some sort of reflection going. get into endless discussions about whether you should see Moses starting to move towards the camels or not. But the nature of working on these films takes so long that every single detail, every frame gets discussed.
Gary
Sometimes
Perkovac
quite
did a lot
passionately.
of the animation.
Oh yeah, Gary Perkovac on the kids here, and through the song that follows.
And this was
This
a
is
clever
a great-
cheat, yeah.
cheat that Dave Lyons managed to pull off in his animation of the rocks breaking into the well. Because there's always that telltale line that goes around when you know a piece of the background is going to move. And
Yeah, where you can see that that's a piece of cell animation and the rest is painted
Yeah,
back.
even kids,
Yeah.
the youngest kids know, oh, he's going to pick up that rock.
yeah, so we tried hard not to have that.
Yeah, Rudolph did some nice animation in this scene as well. And Michelle Pfeiffer went back and did some pickup stuff, some extra stuff
Yeah,
when
this
she saw
little
the
bit
animation.
right there.
Yeah.
She was great. This was one of our simplified sequences that actually I think turned out better because we did simplify it. We didn't put as much of the lighting effect and let them play as silhouettes against the
The
lit
light coming
tint.
through the tent.
Yeah, it feels like the
And,
film is flashed, that you pre-exposed it before you shot the scene. It's really nice.
There was a great deal of discussion about just how much Moses should cover himself up and how big that towel should be.
High priest.
Danny Glover did a nice job on this, even though it's a small role. He
Yeah, he was
really
wonderful.
Yeah.
he really gave a
Tremendous
great
energy.
performance.
This was also actually a simplified sequence, which, given that it's a crowd number with
With
a lot of
firelight.
firelight and a lot of
And the
shadows
same
so on.
fire reused a million times. Who was that? Conan who did the fire?
As well as, the shadows, reusing the characters and
Offsetting them to create the
offsetting them
shadows.
to create
yeah.
the shadows. Great job.
And Gary Perkovac doing
Jethro.
Jethro.
Please, sir, I wish you wouldn't. I've done.
And again, the background artists were really conscious of how the characters were going to be played against them. And
This sequence
Just-
was conceived and reconceived 1,000 times during the movie, what it was going to be.
It was actually was it Ron Lucas, other head of background, who did the color studies
the
for
color
this?
studies,
Yeah.
yes.
Oh, thinking of reconceived? I mean, think about poor old Stephen Schwartz writing this song.
Yeah.
'Cause, how many songs were there? I think there must have been 4 or 5 different songs written before
Quite a
this,
few.
this one.
The guy who saved us was our Steve over here.
Actually, a poem.
Oh yeah,
That-
yeah, The Measure of a Man.
Hmm.
Yeah.
That you just happen to have
Yeah.
in the
Well, that I happen to have remembered from my school days. That I had remembered we had learned it, and I said, "Oh, well, you know what? I'll let me see if I can find that." And so I
Steal
had
it.
someone find it from the library, and it worked quite well.
and Stephen Schwartz had been sort of banging his head because he'd done so many passes of great songs, but somehow we weren't getting across what we needed to get across for the moment. And when Steve handed Stephen Schwartz the poem, it just sort of like you could see the light shine.
Yeah, the light bulb just went on.
Stephen Schwartz gave it that wrinkle of making it about God through Heaven's Eyes, and that really helped.
We ought to mention Brian Stokes Mitchell as well, who did the
Absolutely.
song of Jethro. Incredible, energetic performer, just came in and set the whole studio on fire. It was incredible.
Yeah, it was great. I mean, I turned around and looked at everyone in the booth as he was singing, and people just had these big grins on their faces because he was Jethro when he was doing that. He was just,
Oh, bigger than life, yeah.
oh my God, he was
We didn't
wonderful.
mention, the Teflon sketch.
Oh yes, Todd
Todd
Kurosawa's
Kurosawa, yeah.
Teflon sketch.
Yeah, the two of them sitting on the rock with all the sheep around them was a concept sketch done by one of the story artists way back at the beginning of 1995, and in every single incarnation of the film, every reiteration,
It was
that sketch
always
was
there.
always in. It was actually a very sad moment when we had to cut the story sketch out and put the line
Yeah.
test in.
Yeah. But the animation was great. It
Oh, yeah.
was just
But
like,
now it's immortalized
Yeah.
as Teflon sketch.
good old Todd.
And the chances of any sketch, any idea getting from the like the very first weeks all the way through.
Almost zero.
Usually
yeah.
it evolves the movie, but this stayed in.
We actually had a group of dancers choreograph the traditional dancing in that area and come up with a way in which Moses and Zipporah could dance together.
But not touch.
But not actually touch, because in the period there's no way that men and women would actually dance close together in public. So they're all, authentic dance steps.
That Tom Owens did a lot of the dancing now.
Oh yeah.
Oh, God.
The animation, not the actual dancing.
Yes, they tried to get us to dance with the group for the EPK crew, and we all just
No.
refused. Oh, and do you remember trying to get Richie to do the design of the tapestry that was going to be the dissolve from
To
that,
this.
True, yeah.
that background?
So Richie,
Took
is that
forever.
done yet?
Thanks, Richie. I think in the end,
he
Armin
did it.
Melkonian actually designed
Yeah.
it.
Wasn't it from like his grandmother or father or something?
His grandfather.
Oh, actually, he's a rug dealer
Yeah.
Or he designs rugs, I think. So,
in Armenia.
yeah.
There's little subtle things like the rays of light coming
Yeah.
through from behind the mountain. If you look closely, they're actually animating. They move. Oh, and do you remember putting the sheep in to cover over Moses'
His
feet?
bare
Because we
feet, yeah.
accidentally had him barefoot here, and of course he has to have sandals on in order to take
And
the
Wendy
sandals
Zeller
off.
gave us the note that she had noticed that
Yeah.
we had to fix it. James Baxter really did all the...
Yeah, James
the
Baxter, who
animation
actually
in-
came to
in the set.
DreamWorks to work on El Dorado, and we asked him as a favor, would you help out and animate a sequence or two for us? And he ended up falling in love with the character and sticking with the whole
Yeah.
film.
He did a wonderful
Brendan, you
job.
want to talk about the voice of God? That's coming up.
That was one of the biggest challenges we had on the movie, was finding what the voice of God was going to be. And we didn't want to do the same thing we've heard many times, which is the big booming, deep voice
James Earl
character.
Jones.
James Earl Jones or a slowed down Charlton Heston. We wanted to make it something that was personal to Moses, that it would affect him. So we thought, let's put all the voices in of all the people in his life. And so we
Oh, Nick
had
Fletcher
all
did a
of the
wonderful job
actors.
of layering all these actors together, recorded, doing the same lines, doing even the same readings.
and they were cascading, and he threw in some sound effects, and it was just beautiful. But we found that no one was listening to what was being said. We were just listening to the sound of what was going on.
There was also that problem that it did sound like a whole pantheon of gods, and one of the sort of themes of the story is that there is actually only one god. So, we went back and then found ways of... Actually, ultimately, it's Val Kilmer's voice, but treated somewhat.
And
Yeah.
Hans's music is absolutely a
Oh,
standout
just-
in this sequence.
Oh, poor old Hans. He originally wrote something which was sort of, a bit of choirs and organs and all that kind of stuff. And we said, Hans, this is
What we've been trying
this
to
is
get
the
away
stereotype.
from.
Yeah, we want something that's completely different and unexpected. And he went and locked himself away and smoked a lot of cigarettes and disappeared for about 4 or 5 days, and then invited us in and said, guys, if this isn't it, you have to get somebody else because this is all I've got. And then
it
played us
was
this incredible piece of
It was
music.
an
Beautiful.
epiphany. It was a fabulous moment. Jamie Lloyd did a lot of the CGI burning
Well,
bush
he did
effects.
all of it.
Oh, and then
And
Ed
we
Coffey
had-
did the hand-drawn stuff. In fact, all of the
the
fire
ripples
effects...
on the ground.
Yeah, all the fire effects are actually both CG and hand-drawn, so you
And
get a
then-
texture and a sort of a painterly quality to it.
And Jane Gotts put in the lighting, the
caustic
lighting on the walls, and blended in. She was the one who integrated the 2D into the background and into the burning bush. The
What we were
3D.
after was the sense that what you were seeing was natural phenomena, but behaving in a supernatural fashion. So the fire would have elements of the way in which water moves and would project light the way light reflects off a swimming pool or something like that. A whole mixture of different qualities.
Yeah, so that it was sort of the opposite. There was fire, but it seemed like water, and the sounds that you're hearing has sort of an ocean feel to it. It's not the crackling of fire.
Yeah, Lon Bender spent a lot of time on the sound in the picture in general. He and his team.
And as well the color model crew, and Kathy Altieri, our color goddess, basically, spent so much time on every sequence, but this one in particular, where she was really working hard to make sure that light felt like it was really blowing out and getting subtle and all of the nuances of
And
it
all-
without
also
being too over the
The
top.
tendrils of
Yeah,
pick him up.
the lighting, the colours of the lighting, all the way through the movie. There's actually a lighting script in which the palettes being used sequence by sequence have a flow that reflects the emotional journey that we want to take both Moses and the audience.
That was something
on.
Kathy did very early on, and we stuck pretty closely to it.
Oh yeah, it's amazing looking back at that stuff, but it really is pretty true.
Yeah, this is so well acted by James. And Brian Cliff did the, and his team did the cleanup on Moses. Really did a nice job.
Again, trying to get that interaction between 3D and 2D elements.
Remember, it kept having to
immensely
go
difficult.
back. First, they'd do a rough version of Moses, and then it would go to the burning bush team for the fire, and then they'd have to do the drapery and the clothes, and then it would go back to the CGI people.
And then there was the hand-drawn stuff that was done afterwards. Yeah, and the sequence went back and... Or each scene of the sequence went back and forth 5 or 6 times. One of the confusions about animation, by the way, is that individual shots are referred to as scenes, and overall scenes are referred to as sequences. Don't know why, it's just a tradition. So there's a subtle thing which, again, probably most people don't notice through the sequence, that the bush itself actually grows and blossoms.
As it's taken over by God.
Then do you remember this sequence coming up? Originally, we had the idea that,
Yeah.
we would cut straight to the other end of the discussion, that Moses had said what he was going to say to Zipporah, and Zipporah was now deeply upset and angry at him, and Moses was kind of apologizing and saying, well, I've got to go. And eventually she says, I'm going to go with you. And although it was a great sequence, and we even actually got as far as animating, Rodolphe Guénedin animated a good deal of it, we realized, looking at the movie as a whole, it produced a sort of kink in the emotional arc.
Well, it became Zipporah's scene more than it was
Yeah.
Moses.
But also Moses was, full of life and full of his mission and so on when he comes down from the burning bush. Then he had this dip of terrible regret and sorrow, and then he had to be back up again in order to go into Pharaoh with, the news of what he was going to do. And it just became too complicated as a sort of emotional
Yeah,
arc.
stopping to have an argument with his wife just wasn't quite...
Yeah, we wanted to keep it up all the way so he'd be full of the mission, and then the crash would come when he actually confronts Pharaoh. So then we went back and had to reconceive the scene. And actually, Steve, it was your idea to do that distant shot where stuff...
Well, it's
that we-
actually Alfred
It was-
Hitchcock's idea in Topaz, but
That is why I
So that, stuff that we already know what Moses is going to tell to Zipporah, we don't need to actually hear him say it, but it actually becomes interesting when you are trying to guess what it is he's saying.
yeah, because there was no way we could write the scene, no matter what we did. If you try to put into words a personal epiphany,
I'm coming with you.
it's different for everybody. So we thought, let's just let the audience guess what they're saying.
This is another coup de grace by Kathy Altieri. Just this transition from background to background, keeping the characters still. She did this beautiful blend of color, getting us back into Egypt and the colors of Egypt, and
And then we
it's
go to
just
this
incredible.
Immensely complicated series of dissolves, always keeping Moses and Zipporah in the shot, and this was a real job of layout, trying to design the shot around all these elements.
This was Marcus, wasn't it?
Marcus Matar, yeah.
Yeah, he did a terrific job.
And actually, Kathy Jones, who animated Moses, doing this sort of Harrison Ford intensity.
Yeah, just
Yeah.
slowly getting more intense, more intense.
This is one long music cue, I think, from the beginning, from when Moses wakes up, all the way through to the doors open here that Hans did. It's like 9 minutes. It's my favorite cue in the movie.
And do you remember Ofra Hazar, who did the singing voice of
Yocheved?
Yocheved, came in literally one evening while we were recording in London and just ad-libbed that,
Yeah.
the singing track.
Just dashed it off.
It was great.
For about 3/4 of an hour, she just came in, did it a couple of times and
Uh-huh.
left again. It was just wonderful.
This sequence, Brenda, you worked on a million
Oh yeah.
times because it kept having
It
permutations.
just trying to figure out what Ramesses' reaction would be when Moses returned. Would he be angry? Would he be flippant? Would he be overjoyed? What would he be? And because we built such a relationship between the brothers before, and they had nothing against each other when Moses left, other than just love and regret that he was leaving, it had to be joyful. I mean, we had
But then there was
a hard
discussion
time
about
selling that.
whether Pharaoh would actually behave this way in front of a court and all kinds of stuff.
But as far as he was concerned, Moses was still his brother, whom he loved and missed. So
We decided to go, with the emotional drive.
We
and-
we also let Moses have a moment with Ramesses because originally Mary just came back and went right into his speech, and it's like, well, he didn't care anything about that he's missed his brother all these
Yeah.
years.
Also, we wanted to have that sense of conflict that Moses really didn't, although he believes in the mission that he's coming in with,
he still loves
he's
his
suddenly
brother.
faced with the fact that he's going to be doing something awful to his brother who he loves,
Patrick did most of Hotep and Hoi in the sequence.
Patrick Mate.
Yeah. In this and this next song.
This whole sequence was one of the ones that we did so many times that I think Rafe was beginning to wonder.
If we knew what we were doing.
Yeah, and it was really hard because I'd try to explain, what our thinking was and everything. And he paid us a really nice compliment after he saw the film for the first time, saying, "Wow, everything you said you were going to do, you did." I think he just was not quite believing it when he was having to record over and over again.
I also remember that we had a whole bunch of these scenes in final, and all the crowd had colors, remember? And Brenda said, "Oh, wait a minute, we were supposed to do this all with them in white, and it will look better if they're all in white." And
Oh,
we
yeah,
said,
and then having to go
"You're
back and-
absolutely
Go back
right.
in."
You're absolutely right, Brenda." And we had to go back and redo all those scenes.
And,
'Cause
And it
Right.
is better in white.
Thank heaven that Penny Finkelman Cox and Sandy Rabens, our producers, were sympathetic to some of the creative concerns.
Yes,
Yeah. And Bill Damashki, who is
our
the production manager.
production manager. He had the patience of Job on this one.
Do you remember, actually, this was another of Stephen's suggestions, was that right at the beginning of the sequence you should see that it's all being done with smoke and mirrors. You can then go into magic stuff that appears to be supernatural, as long as you've established at the very beginning that it was fake.
And that was kind of the brief to the effects artists as well. Steve Woods headed up the 2D animation on this, and Patrick Wittig did the 3D. And it was to make sure that it felt like smoke and mirrors, and it wasn't just really supernatural. There's a shot of Hotep at one point where Steve had animated where the light shines and you can actually see Hotep's skeleton for a brief flash. And we said, no, that's now getting into looking at a supernatural thing. It has to be like someone just did a smoke flash in front of him instead of being able to actually see through him. This was a scene here.
Yeah, originally this whole number was envisioned to be a comic relief part of the picture, and Siegfried and Roy were the prototypes for Hotep and Hoi. And we had like Vegas showgirl singers singing the names of the gods, and it was clear that it didn't fit in the picture, especially after what had just come before it. So Hans Zimmer reorchestrated the whole thing and changed into this new darker tone. This is Patrick doing all these scenes. Here
With
at
Hotep and Hoi.
Yeah, and Steve Martin and Marty Short actually did their own singing on this.
And this is only like one guy rubber stamped a million times to make all these guys.
And this was another scene. I think Kathy Altieri did the color setup for this sequence. All the color keys going across to get the flow of what colors we were going into. The dramatic lighting. Here's our homage to Star Wars.
Yeah, Kathy did a great job of the color in this.
Again, Patrick Wittig for the smoke and the
A lot of,
lighting.
yeah,
Just
subtle texture stuff that's going on in the background.
And Kathy Zielinski did the early snake scenes.
Yes, actually, Kathy Zelensky also came up with the transition of the staff into the snake, Moses' staff turning
Yeah,
into the
the
snake.
wood.
That whole clever
was-
transition was her idea. This was one of these complicated things where the choice of when and how Moses' snakes eat the magician's snakes. That the original story has it being a big dramatic thing, very
Public
visible
thing.
to everybody. We wanted to make it something slightly more subtle, so that we didn't feel right off the bat that Moses was kind of in control of the whole thing.
All right, Moses. I know you. What's
This scene was another really tough one to get
Ramesses.
the scene between Moses and Ramesses, how we were going to play that, because we started off a little too nonchalant in some scenes, and others we were too antagonistic, and it was a really tough and fine line we walked through this one, acting-wise, on how they were relating to each other.
I have to maintain.
But it was important to get across what Ramesses was feeling, the tradition of his father and all this weighing on his head from the early sequence we saw when Seti was bawling him out, trying to parallel that scene into this one. It was,
My people.
we counted a lot on the brothers' relationship to pull us through this one.
And also a great deal on the animators to deliver the level of acting.
Yeah, Todd
I mean, here, for
Kurosawa did some
instance,
fabulous story sketches in this.
Oh yeah.
Which Dave
And-
Brewster translated.
Ronnie Del Carmen as well.
Oh yeah, because this scene in particular, where Ramesses is realizing you didn't come back to be with me, you came back to take the slaves away, were just great story
This whole-
sketches. And actually, this was one of those things where Rafe didn't believe we were actually going to be able to
To
deliver
pull
the
it off.
acting.
Didn't think the lines were quite.
Because the lines on
There.
their own are just sort of, I had thought.
But he does such a good read on it.
Oh, it's great.
Rafe, he's so good in it.
But it's mostly the stuff that falls between the lines.
And this is one of the scariest music cues
Yeah.
in the movie,
I love it.
right there.
Was that was Harry Gregson Williams' idea, wasn't it, to suddenly
To
have
that
that punch?
sting.
Yeah,
So
it was
that-
like,
I do
whoa.
not know this
Yeah,
story.
I don't think he really has any of those anywhere else in the picture. It's like the only time that
Yeah.
you really.
It was
My
never like
heart
that
just jumped.
in the scratch. We'd never done that, and it was just a brilliant idea they came up with. Here you'll notice a number of parallels, similar shots to scenes that were in that first reprimand when Seti's telling the boys off.
Has been doubled.
Yeah, the one weak link in the chain.
And this is where, Simon, you always wonder how come he doesn't catch his nose in the
Yeah,
door.
doors when they close it.
The Get Smart.
It's Moses. That's H8, isn't it?
Oh yeah, all of the slaves had numbers, and after
And
a while
he's
we
the
actually,
only one we know.
we could actually recognize them.
Yes, we liked H8. He was used a lot.
This was another scene that went through a lot of changes because trying to get the dramatic sense of what was going on without overplaying it. I mean, from here on out, the film, as Steve was saying earlier, is much more dramatic. We're getting more and more intense as the rest of the film goes on.
This idea was from Nicholas Meyer, remember? To have Aaron,
Aaron question, yeah.
yeah, approach Moses and say, hey, when did you start caring about us?
So actually, one of the tricky things of the film as a whole was how to keep Moses alive as a developing character after he's met God, because essentially he becomes a mouthpiece for his God in the original Bible story, and how to keep him alive and have something going on dramatically within him
Yeah, keep
was a
him
real struggle.
human.
Hear what I say.
But again, the brothers' relationship between he and Ramesses really helped us with that, as well as his relationship with Aaron and Miriam. With him doubting himself and not, because he can't read God's mind at this point. He's still trying to figure out why things aren't going right and what's happening. He doesn't realize in the beginning that there has to be a build to make Pharaoh understand what's happening.
Sandra Bullock did such a nice job acting that.
Yeah. That was Emanuela's scene, wasn't
Yeah,
it?
Oh yeah, Emanuela Cosi.
Kazi did it.
Now you can't see on DVD, but actually on the boat there are little figures poling the boat along, because they're the same animation that shows up in the closer up shots later, and it's just pasted back in there. Unfortunately, the resolution just isn't there.
Someday, maybe.
I love the subtle things, like as we do that little crane down, the foreground ground tilts. It doesn't just move as a flat object. A lot of the stuff that scene planning put in.
Yeah, and young Ramesses, the boy is played by Bobby Motown, which is certainly a name that's easy to remember.
You cannot keep ignoring us.
Yes, another of those shots where
Vacation shot.
which ended up being just a real pain to do.
Trying not to show his feet so we wouldn't have to animate a
A
drop
shadow.
shadow
Yeah.
under Moses.
And then we ended up having to do all these complicated things with the water and the reeds and so on to cover it over.
Look too much like that's exactly what we were trying to do.
Yeah.
Things like the clouds in the
Clouds,
background
yeah.
are actually, again, a 2D painting which is being manipulated and twisted in scene plan, I think.
Mm-hmm.
And sometimes it's just a simple move. We didn't even have to morph or manipulate it in 3D. It would just be a simple move.
Was it
And
Doug
This is
Eichler?
Doug Eichler's Amazing Blood
Yeah.
in Water. Yeah.
Doug
really
Eichler
looks
and his
good.
plagues. I was so glad when he came back on our project.
Yeah.
Rosanna
did.
Lyons, yeah.
Oh yeah, particularly that shot
Really?
where the guard coming up here
In
falls
this
into the
one.
water and
Yeah.
comes
Oh.
out completely covered in blood.
She
Yeah.
has so much fun doing that.
Yeah.
That was the last scene on the movie, maybe.
Yeah.
One of them.
And we made
That's-
sure there was no blood on the
On the
Nemesis.
head. Yeah, that's to me sort of the tragedy sometimes of animation, the opportunities, and you just physically can't do it.
Because you'd end up having to animate it in 4 or 5 shots afterwards and trying to keep it stuck on and so on would be very difficult.
This was another area where we had to simplify. We had the in one version of this, we had the magicians really looking like they were trying to outdo Moses once again with this. We had them changing the color of the water to all different colors, and
That became fabulous.
blue and yellow
yeah.
and pink and yellow.
The
Ew,
water show.
that whole thing. But it just made them look a little too powerful, and this is where we wanted to show that they were, they
Just
might
starting to be
Yeah.
weakening.
outmatched.
They might have been able to do that snake bit, but this, you could see the trick, seeing the powder and everything, where with Moses's attempt at it, you knew it wasn't.
Oh, the sequence coming up, so Moses inspiring his people, that went through a number of different versions. I remember I was one of the people who boarded it half a dozen times. At one point we had it getting progressively bigger and bigger in scale and going to huge crowds. And it just ended up looking like some sort of political rally. It became a sort of man running for president movie.
And this, keeping it so confined, getting the characters so big in screen, a lot of close-ups even on the incidentals, just kept it very personal and very
Intimate.
human.
Yeah.
And here again, we were trying to recall the prologue. By
In fact,
copying
reusing some of the
shots.
animation from the
Yes.
prologue.
Doug Eichler did these frogs here. I could have
And
used
Sean-
more frogs and bugs in the.
Yeah, actually,
Plays.
they came out so well that we could quite
Yeah.
easily have done
Yeah.
two
Not in
times
this
as
shot,
many
but just
shots.
more shots because they're so much fun.
And those bugs. Oh, eesh. Yeah, Kathy Zielinski had a great time with that one. 27 million locusts? Is that what it?
Oh yeah, one of the shots actually has 7 million rendered locusts in it.
Once I called you brother. Once I thought the chance to make you laugh.
This was another sort of brainstorming thing. We're having trouble with the plagues. We hadn't had it originally as a song. We had it as just score, and we were having trouble getting across the relationship between the two brothers, what Moses was feeling when this was happening, what Ramesses was feeling. It was just sort of anger on both sides, and it sort of came out of nowhere. Like, why all of a sudden were both of them so angry at each other?
And
We understood.
Schwartz wrote a song which had the content, but didn't sort of resonate with the rest of the movie. And it was Hans's idea to use All I Ever Wanted as if it had been a sort of brothers song, and bring that back as the theme that runs through the verse.
And it really just brought it all together.
Another blow.
I remember Jeffrey was concerned that it was all spectacle and we were losing the personal story.
Which he was absolutely right about.
So
yeah.
we had to go back and add more shots of Ramesses and Moses.
How could you have come to hate me so? Is this what you...
Could have done with a lot more fireballs as well. Burning Hell was great
These were Doug
Doug
Eichler as
Eichler.
well, yeah.
Well, he did all of the 3D.
on this.
pretty
This
much.
is a suitably
And Sean McLaughlin
grossing.
did a lot of work on it as well, though.
Oh, this was
Was
another of Steven's
Steven
suggestions.
Spielberg. Yeah.
The interrelation of the two characters. It's another tricky one to get through doing
That-
scene planning.
And that little gesture on Ramesses was sort of mimicking sort of his petulance as a teenager back in the early sequence where he's been reprimanded by his father.
I think Ken Cullotta did that
Oh
scene.
yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, originally the small scene, yeah.
Yeah.
Lynette Charters did the Plague of Darkness on this, the 2D stuff, and
Then there's a layering, a sort of multiple exposure to
yeah,
get
Lynn
that.
Green figured that one out.
Yeah. To get it sort of, to have that liquid feel. Here again, we're deliberately trying to echo a whole series of the shots that happened during All I Ever Wanted when he first, when he went back into the palace. But now he's going through seeing the same things, but in a different, sort of different light, a different way of looking at them.
And whereas before the other sequence was fun and lighthearted with the water balloon, this one is more serious.
Well, this is the thing that Ronnie
This is-
created. He was originally briefed to do the scene. We had it written rather differently. And Ronnie called us in and said, look, I've had a kind of strange idea. I hope it's not going too far off the wall. And he showed us, and the first thing that we saw was this one long sketch with the
Silhouette of the
statue
statue.
and Ramsey
Yeah.
sitting up there. We just thought, oh yeah, that's
That's
it.
it.
Yeah.
And then we realized that's what this whole movie has to be, you know.
Yeah.
It was one of those things where it was pivotal for the entire film,
It
trying to
became
reach
like a
for those
template
depths. Yeah.
of what we had to do in the whole movie.
It's great when those things happen. It's so inspiring, and then you go back into the film with more insight, and just being able to put those extra few layers on makes such a difference.
But we went around and around in this sequence because at one time it felt like Moses was too manipulative, going in with some agenda to get him to concede.
Yes, we
And
wanted-
Ramesses was too drunk and too good-hearted, and you felt sorry for Ramesses, and you felt angry at Moses for taking advantage of him.
So we wanted it to actually be a sincere remembering by Moses, and Ramesses not to come around too easily.
Thought it was a horrible omen and fasted for 2 months. Father was furious.
That was a big problem for quite a while, and a couple of the screenings we had was that you'd come out feeling so sorry for Ramesses that you felt like Moses was a bully, and it was
I mean, he didn't
wait a
deserve to win.
minute, we've got to switch the, it's fine to have sympathy and a little empathy for our, for our
Villain, but you've got to feel a
villain,
lot
but
more for the hero.
you have to be there with the hero, so it was a little hard. That's partly Rafe's fault, I think.
Yeah, he's too good.
For being so likable.
Yeah, well, just that vulnerable quality in his voice. You just
The
go,
great-
"Oh."
The great thing about Val and Rafe, they were able to play a teenager and an adult, mature man convincingly.
Well, that was the tricky
That was
thing
a
of
hard-
casting them.
yeah.
Trying to find voices that could actually do that range, and were also good actors. So very hard.
But
Why?
they were great. I mean, Val did such an incredible job coming in so many times. I mean, he was right there with us wanting to rework and rework.
I think he
The
probably has
character.
the world record for a recording session, about
Yeah.
18 sessions or something, which for an animated film is amazingly high.
But also just his dedication to the wanting to see the movie again, knowing that he wanted to try something different and keep expanding on it. It wasn't just us saying, hey, we need to do it again. It was him saying, I want to do it again. Made a huge difference.
I do.
Yeah, it really works when you hear young Moses at the beginning of the picture.
My father had the right idea
It
about
plays as an 18-year-old.
people, and I think
This is
it's
where we really
time
turn
I
Ramesses into the baddie.
and there shall be
Let
a
him get the
great
full grip of his psychosis.
that never has been or
His dad
ever will
really
be
screwed him up in
again.
this one.
Yeah, and one of the things I really like about what we managed to get in here is a number of places where there are things which were set up kind of as incidentals or background things, or even like that wall, which you think the whole point of the wall is that scene between Seti and Moses, and then it actually comes back and is used again.
Take a lamb.
You're very happy about those things.
And we tried to make this hyssop.
Mark the
We went.
Oh, the research. Yes,
Yes.
apparently the marks were painted over the door lintels and door jambs with hyssop.
land of Egypt.
And we researched what hyssop was.
Yeah.
Smite.
Which, of course, none of us knew or even what it looked like.
This is another of these very subtle 3D
3D.
backgrounds.
Yeah. So we can
But when I
just
see the
shift
blood
the
upon
camera.
them,
There's the old
slightly.
well from the other sequence.
So I don't know if anybody actually recognizes that we're in the same location, but from the other
But it
side of
is.
the archway.
and the plague shall not enter.
And there actually was stuff on that table as well,
Yeah.
but you don't get to see it because Moses stands
Yeah.
in the way.
Well, originally Harold put like, just cut out things there, just as a placeholder. But we were going to try to make it like the Passover meal, but you can't really see it.
Now this is the beginning of Jamie Lloyd's brilliance of trying to find the look of the plague of death, still keeping elements of what we've been using for the look of God, basically,
The burning bush.
in the burning bush, as well as when we get into the Red Sea and everything, all the elements of these miracles, plagues, whatever you want to call them.
They're sort of natural phenomena.
It's
But this had to feel like, this had to feel sentient. It had to feel like this mist was making conscious choices, checking out the doors, seeing the ones that are marked and turning away from them.
And in every visually and sound wise and everything, we were trying to figure out what would a gust of wind look like if you could see it. And I
And
think
it sounds like a lot like
Jamie?
Brenda, actually.
Well, strangely enough,
Here
it
we
actually
go.
is
Again.
Brenda's voice.
yeah, Sim Evan Jones, when he was working on the film early on, we cut together this. Lorna Cook boarded the scene, and she was the one who actually did this wispy looking stuff in her story sketches. And so when we put it up on the story reel, we were trying to find the sound to it, and Sim had this little breath go through just sort of randomly, and then we decided, that's what we need when it actually takes a life. And so we went through and he recorded me doing that, and it was another one of those things where it just stuck as
It just
opposed to
stayed.
going away.
It sounded so perfect. And this is, of course, Orion.
This is my little nod to the sort of crazier theories of Egyptology of course, Orion's belt of the 3 pyramids on the Giza Plateau and all that stuff. But moving aside,
And this is our
This-
homage to Citizen
Citizen
Kane,
Kane, yeah.
the law library.
Steve's. Attempted another whole thing of Patrick Whittig and Jane Gotts, and of the 3D elements, the getting the light rays,
But
the
trying to get-
shadow.
yeah, trying to get all
falling
of that
off of-
stuff and the sense of the light really blowing out where it's a highlight on the bodies.
And feeling the dust within the light.
A number of
That's
these
it.
scenes actually went through final color stage many times to get them right.
Leave me.
Funny, it looks effortless now, actually.
Yeah, but it was
Well,
really
that's
hard
pretty
to get
straightforward.
that. Yeah.
I'm trying to get the acting, because it was so subtle in the sequence.
And Rafe did an incredible performance in that.
Oh, that Leave Me.
Yeah,
that
just-
still gives me chills.
I mean, in this, we were always trying to get the sense that
It's not over.
the movie isn't over yet. That Ramesses still has an issue to deal with.
Yeah, without being blatant, I think at one point we had him reach for his knife or his
Yeah.
sword or something. It was just like, yeah, that's a
Well, there
little
also
too cliche.
there were scenes where we wanted to cut back and see him preparing his army.
Our favorite
Oh, yes.
scene in
Bruce
the
Faris
film.
did this.
Yeah, actually, this was the thing where we wanted Christoph to animate it, and Christoph advocated Bruce, and Bruce begged to do the scene, and we eventually said, okay, you can have a go at it. And then he
And
produced this
it's
piece of animation
incredible.
which just dropped us. It was like,
Oh my
oh,
God!
Lord,
yeah.
this is,
It's everything we had hoped for.
Yeah, and more, and Val's performance on that just
yeah,
was
do you remember
so...
recording Val? Val just sits in a chair and smokes cigarettes and is very, very quiet, and he doesn't do any of the sort of physicalization of what he's acting. But then, he literally just broke down and cried in front of the microphone. It was amazing.
Yeah, it's gut-wrenching when you...
Yeah, and to be able to do that in an animated film was,
to actually
was
have a
such
character where you can
wonderful-
take to that place where he's actually crying out of sympathy for something that he has been instrumental in causing to happen to the villain.
just the pain, the love of his brother, the love of his people, the sorrow for these children. It was just wonderful to be able to go there with his character.
Yeah, I remember when we first heard this song from Stephen Schwartz. It's like,
Oh.
boy, this is
I
a
know.
beautiful
Yeah,
song.
I was in
that's
tears.
definitely a hit straight off.
Yeah,
I just
I don't
knew.
think it surprised us that it would later win the Oscar.
This is actually a lovely sequence because there's a progressive change in the lighting from that sort of pre-dawn light where it's all reflected light through to actually getting the sun reflecting off the clouds and seeping
Bringing
down
the
into the
colour
town.
in.
And then ultimately you get into this full rich colour as they start to leave Egypt.
Yeah, that was sort of a blending of Ron Lucas and Kathy Altieri working really hard together to get that.
It should be said that Ron and Paul, who ended up being our heads of background, neither of them had actually worked in animation before. Ron was actually an easel painter, just a fine artist, and
Yeah, an art
I say
teacher.
just, but
Yeah, just,
art
yeah.
teacher.
You should see his
and Paul
stuff.
had done matte paintings for features,
Uh-huh.
but neither of them knew anything about the sort of the animation process. And I think they brought a very special kind of quality and
Yeah,
way
very
of looking at painting.
a fresh approach to it.
This occupied Kathy Faraday for a little while, this scene.
You always feel guilty when you actually give a scene like that to an animator. It's just, okay, you've got about 100 birds you're going to have to animate. And this is probably your life for the next 3 months. Just
And
doing
she's
this
so
one
nice,
shot.
But there it is. There's your life, Kathy, for a few months right there.
This scene we've done so many times.
For
It was
color
actually one of the
palette.
first crowd scenes that proved that the whole 3D crowd thing would actually work.
That was another one where we'd gone back and the Egyptian sequence and made everybody white. We went through a lot of these Hebrew sequences because they had such bright Midian colors, lots of pinks and reds and,
We had to drab them
and
down a
blues.
bit.
We had to really brown them up,
Also,
costume-wise.
conscious attempt to have a wide range of ethnic types or skin tones and so on through this.
But also it was part of the whole theory of this whole sequence. This song is, as you were saying earlier, bringing the color in gradually, and we got too bright too early with a lot of the characters, so that it's later in the desert.
Do you remember
that we
this
brought
shot?
up.
Yeah,
was one of the
definitely.
first uses of the fabulous exposure tool. It's this sort of integrating 3D and 2D material together. And there were some real teething problems. It actually turned out great in the end, but getting the first couple of shots through was so tough.
Lorenzo Martinez really
Well, he was a real
worked
advocate
really
of it.
hard.
And Harold Kraut and Dave Moorhead were sort of the people who got the thing to work.
Yeah, Lorenzo was our head of layout, and worked really hard on this whole film, just
Sort of
getting
pushing the
these
boundaries.
ideas. Yeah, always trying to stretch the limits.
Yeah, the
Kept
scene,
us on our toes.
this made Craig Simpson's life troublesome for a
Scene
while.
planning,
That
yeah.
scene.
Chao Ping Wei, our background painter from China, just did these amazing backgrounds.
Gorgeous.
Throughout the
Fabulous
film.
lighting. Yeah.
A lot of this stuff out through here, this scene just blew us away.
And Richie birds. Richie always
Yep.
wants to have little birds flying through the scenes. Got it in a few scenes.
That was another moment that
Mm-hmm.
we were really glad to get in there, a moment between the true brothers, the blood brothers.
Yeah, again, we had kind of lost the personal story in the sequence in favor of gross numbers of people, and so we put back shots like that.
I kind of have to mention, every time I see one of these water shots, I think of Don Paul and Dan Phillips are two heads of effects, because they, very, very early on, were trying to find that way to integrate the 2D. Don Paul was more head of the 2D effects, and Dan Phillips was head of the 3D effects, and just working really hard with the artists and trying to find that.
Well, there's so much
way
water
of-
through this movie, and it appears in so many places and different sort of qualities, and trying to actually get the sense of scale in something like this.
But they kept their team together so well, working. So everybody was on the same focus. It was pretty incredible what they
Yeah, because
pulled
it was
off.
a vast effects team on this movie, really huge.
Especially these last 10 minutes of the movie
Oh yeah.
were incredible.
And also, considering the 3D people working, they weren't just technicians, they were artists as well. Giving them that artistic freedom to come up with these things, like the Pillar of Fire.
Which Bud Myrick had worked on these scenes.
Along with Ed Coffey, did a lot of the 2D on it.
Yeah, the sort of
Just that
2D touches that make it actually look like a hand-painted thing.
This was a story moment we had to go back into and try to work. We had to lengthen this scene.
Yeah, to get what it is that Moses is feeling at this point. Really
'Cause-
milk that moment.
Yeah, we just originally had him turning around, and we're like, what is going through his head at this point? Why is he looking so sad? But just to assess the situation, just that enough of him looking around, seeing that there was no other way out.
Things like that shot, that down shot where you actually see Moses' robes being pushed back by the waves that are coming through. Really tricky to do, because the waves, of course, are 3D. The interaction is drawn 2D. The robes were done by character, so the order in which the scenes actually flow through the pipeline, the production pipeline, it had to be messed around a great deal to get some of this stuff to work.
That's the Paul Shardlow image, isn't
Oh
it?
yeah, Paul Shardlow, one of the development artists, painted this one little shot. We had like 3 months where we had a bunch of development artists just paint all kinds of crazy ideas for the Red Sea parting, and one of them was this little tiny sketch, color sketch, of the water pulling away in a circle away from Moses' staff, and we all looked at that and said, "That's it. That's the thing we've never seen
We
before."
haven't seen that before.
And Henry Labonta worked with this,
Oh yeah,
the Red
he'd
Sea team.
just come off Twister, and we threw an even bigger problem to him.
Yeah, he'd been working in live action, his entire career, and so this animation thing was a bit new to him. And we did all these paintings, these great paintings of in development of what the Red Sea could look like, and he came back with this stuff that was incredible, but real. He took those paintings to be paintings of what it would look like, as opposed to, no, we want it to look like the painting. So he went back in and
It was sort of two problems for him. One was kind of getting his brain around the idea of making it look like a painting instead of making it look like reality. And then the sort of technical task of using these tools, which are for the most part developed in order to create photorealism, and try and pull them back and force them to render things which looked more painterly, looked more hand done. Oh, this shot was one of
Jeffrey's
those ones.
favorites.
It's one of Stephen's favorites as well.
Yeah.
I think
a lot of
everyone's
people's favorites.
actually.
Yeah, it's such a great idea.
Those are whale sharks, by the way.
Yeah, not a whale. There's
Yeah.
whale sharks in the Red Sea. Yeah.
Just to clarify. Mark Mulgrew did a lot of
Oh yeah.
Yes.
the layouts throughout here. Worked very hard. He was sort of Lorenzo Martinez's
Kinda-
right-hand man,
deputy head of the department.
Remember
as
we,
well.
we put that shot of the camel in because we had lost him. And
Oh,
we had
yeah.
another shot at the end of the movie because it's like, oh, wait a minute, what happened to the camel?
Did he make it? Do you remember
And
one time
this guy-
there was this thing where the camel actually came back and rescued Moses?
Yeah.
Back in the
Real
old
dumb
cartoony
idea.
days. But I don't know if you noticed the sky earlier, way back when Moses was making the decision to go into the sea and then going back after the pillar goes out. We went through this whole technical thing of planning out what part of the sky was
constantly
moving.
Yeah.
Constantly
Twisting.
moving. When it's lit, when it's not, which way the lighting's coming from.
And we've got a couple of real scene planning tour de forces where these shots of the Egyptians running through. There's only actually about 6 Egyptians that were animated.
And they're just cycles.
And you'll notice also a number of them have motion blur on them, which was a really useful little piece of software that we only got right towards the end of production. We went back and picked about 20 shots that we used it on.
You know, we also went through this. Oh, this was... Oh,
Walter
was
Parks.
Walter Parks'
Yeah.
idea.
yeah, but Hans Zimmer's music cue there just, I remember,
Oh, yeah.
instantly brought tears to my eyes when you
Something
heard the
brought
God
back-
theme coming through when that water was coming down.
Yeah, it's breathtaking.
Oh,
Now it's one of these complicated things where some of the spray is actually 2D animation that's been taken in and manipulated in the 3D tool and then added to the 3D rendered stuff, and then there's 2D drawn back on top of it. I mean, just incredibly complicated process.
and this was another moment where we had to go in and rework the story many times, because what would the reaction of these people be when they saw the sea closing? What,
They couldn't just go straight into celebrating
yeah,
because
which
it would
we
seem
had
really
at one
heartless.
point.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it did seem really heartless, but you know, and they couldn't be too sad because you know that there is this sense of freedom going on, but so it's just this stunned silence, realizing the horror of what's happened, but yet they slowly go into realizing
Bill
they're gonna
Damaski
have
gave
a
us the
life
shortcut when he said it should feel like VJ Day,
yeah
where some people are, you know, sobbing because they're overcome, and other people are happy.
Yeah, rejoicing. You'll notice we also kept in just a couple of those Egyptian guards who we'd seen leaving with the Exodus, just to see that some of
Some of
them
the-
made it as well.
yeah, as well as some of the Egyptians were realizing, you know, that it wasn't the right thing to be doing, so they left with the Hebrews.
And then to get closure, we still had to have that sort of final moment when Moses acknowledges that his relationship with his brother is over forever.
And Rafe gives a gut-wrenching
Ah.
performance cry at the end. It's so nice.
That's one of those things that you hold for the end of the recording session because
Yeah.
the actor can only do it about 3 times and then he doesn't have a voice for the rest of the day.
It's like when
Yeah,
he's
well-
screaming charge.
Yeah, it was really hard because 2 of the times when we really needed to get that yelling, he was in a play in London and one, so we really couldn't blow out his voice because he had to go perform that same night. And another one he was doing Oscar and Lucinda, I believe, when I did my little day
You
trip
travelled
to
all the way to
Sydney.
Australia for one day. Well, actually, for a 4-hour recording session.
Well, I got dinner with Rafe out of it.
Oh, yeah.
That's okay.
And this is Miriam playing her tambourine, which was
Yeah.
important.
And actually, this was one of your points, Steve. I remember we got the whole picture together, and we were quite a long way down the line, and you actually said, wait a minute, we haven't acknowledged the completion of the task that Moses was given halfway through the picture.
And we're like, oh, aren't we done
Yeah.
yet? Okay,
Well, we
you're
went back
right.
in and created this heroic final moment for Moses.
Then early on, Stephen had said, you know, we got to have that shot where Moses comes down with the
Oh, yeah.
10
In
Commandments.
many ways, the story
and you
is kind
sketched
of...
it out. Oh, I know what you mean. You mean this
Oh, yeah,
hidden
actually,
shot
right
where he
there in front of him. Yeah,
dollies
just
around him, yeah,
thumbnailed it
like
out.
this. And that was pretty much
That just stayed it, yeah.
And Christoph animated this scene.
An immense amount of work in just like researching what the writing on the tablets
Richie
might have,
Chavez
looked like,
did
and
that. The styling of the letter.
yeah, but what sort of alphabet there would be, and
This
And
is
all of these-
probably one of the biggest scenes in animation where every single character
look
is
closely, they're all
alive. Yes.
animated, they're all moving around,
all the way to the very back.
which is one of the wonders of DVD that they have a resolution to actually see this. I think actually some of those people right up at the top of the screen are actually stationary.
I don't think so.
I don't know
Hey,
who
there
these
we
guys
are,
did.
huh?
Yeah.
The Three Stooges.
Kudos to Penny
Yeah.
and Sandy. They
Immense
They
job
killed
to
us.
Fabulous to
wrangle
work
that
with.
one through. Jeffrey, who was very much a creative partner in making this picture, he was hands-on all the way through. And Ronu's now heading up the whole animation division.
Stephen, who hung in there with us
Yeah,
for so
storytelling through the songs. Hans,
long.
who,
And our musical god here.
yeah, we revere.
And
And
Kathy
our other
and
gods.
Richard. Thank you.
It's like, just keep bowing. You know?
Derek, who
Derek.
gave the incredible scale to the movie, he just came in and made the buildings skyscrapers.
And Nick, what can we say about Nick? He's the
Well,
best.
Tireless worker.
And never ties his shoelaces. I think we ought to mention that too. Ken
And Bill
Bill,
never
who
went home.
Dealt with a lot of difficult issues.
And Kelly and Lorna. Lorna gave so much sensitivity to the
Yeah,
film. She
absolutely.
just boarded a huge amount.
Yeah,
and
all those
just-
things like the death of the firstborn that really needed a very fine touch. Then you get into stuff like scanning and digital, the checking departments.
And
that
boy, they put
no
a
one-
lot of work to
No
get
one
those
ever sort of thinks
sort
about
out the
these
problems.
guys, but yeah, they're the people who make sure that colors don't flash on and off, and that there's a continuity, and things don't suddenly freeze, and
Yeah, how do you think those people enough the
Yeah.
voices and the
it's totally
all the
invisible
people
job.
on the picture?
Phil who hung in and rewrote and retyped scenes. A lot of
And then our
a
story
lot of stuff
artists.
actually gets created in the storyboards as
a lot
well.
of writing done within the storyboards as well. Yeah.
Nicola, who
Carter
we didn't mention
Goodrich.
earlier, had designed a lot of the animals that we used, like the sheep and the camels.
I wish we could have persuaded him to animate on the show as well. So yeah, at the end
So
of the day, I
many
think there's something
people.
like 800 people who are in this list of credits. There's probably about 400 who are really, on the movie for about a year and a half to 2 years. Which is, when you actually add it up, it represents maybe 1,000 years of effort to make one of these things, which is terrifying.
Which is why it's not good to work on one alone.
Yes,
The
I see.
layout
Want to,
department really,
They're 50
Put in a lot of-
generations.
extraordinary layout work.
yeah. Lorenzo headed up a really great team.
The background artists.
Scene planning of
Fabulous
people who
work.
actually pull together all the elements and actually, integrate it all and make sure it actually
camera.
works on screen.
All the final line artists, they really did a great job in pulling those characters that it looks like only one guy.
Yeah, because there may be half
Yeah.
a dozen animators. In the case of, I think, Moses, there's maybe 12 animators or something who worked on that character. Now, they get the performance to match, but there's no way that they can actually all learn to draw exactly the same way. And so you have the final line department who then make it look like a
Pulls it all
single
together.
person's hand drew the whole picture.
Especially in a movie like this, where there's so many characters. I mean, the last 20 minutes of the movie are nothing but crowd
This is a nice
scenes.
thing that actually Don and Dan wanted to do, which was to break out the individual sequences in effects and credit people for those sequences that they worked on. Because they may have spent a year of their lives working on one sequence.
And Al Holter was sort of the Mark Mulgrew of effects. I mean, he was the right-hand man of Don, going through and being there and helping it all look stylistically together and helping people to get the effects the right style for each scene. He was very instrumental in that. Digital paint, God.
The editorial crew was so terrific.
Sound design, Lon and Wiley. And of
And-
course,
oh, yeah,
a lot of re-recording. I mean, even though you record all the
And-
voices in
and
advance, there's then a
Sean.
great deal of recording that happens at the end of the show, where you go in and do a lot of the crowd work, and also sometimes re-record parts of the original characters,
Yeah,
main
they
characters.
did a fantastic job.
Then there's
They
the
hung
people
in
who are
there.
truly invisible, and the management crew who actually help organize these, it's maybe 1,100 shots or something that go through, and each one of these shots may have a couple of thousand drawings and a whole lot of digital elements, and tracking all that stuff and just kind of keeping it organized and knowing. I think in the whole show we maybe lost 3 or 4 shots that just kind of disappeared somewhere.
But they were just as dedicated as the artists. I mean, it was
Oh, yeah.
like they
Well,
were
more
right
so
there with
sometimes.
us,
Yeah, they're the
wanting to
people who
make
put
it.
in the 16-hour days.
Yeah. But they were there. They understood that when we needed to make a change or wanted to plus something, it was usually if it's pulling teeth, but in the end they were right there wanting to make it
Yeah,
the best
supporting
it
the
could be.
creative
It wasn't
choices.
just about the numbers to them.
Yeah.
They were great.
Which actually
crew.
was a nice feeling that the whole movie really had, and it's a credit to the crew that the sense of ownership, that everybody who worked on the picture had a feeling that they really had a contribution and kind of the picture was their picture.
All across the board. it
Really
was.
glad about. So,
This song.
getting into the amazing voices who sang these very tough songs. One of the downsides of Stephen Schwartz's songs is that he writes very difficult songs to actually perform. Very rangy.
Yeah, it was really. Oh,
Steve
poor
is having a small
Steve's
fit
having a
right
little
now. Yeah,
episode over here. I hope
Yeah.
he's okay.
it's very emotional for him.
And because of this being the first film out of DreamWorks animated film, we put in all the people who
Helped set up the
Helped-
studio,
yeah,
actually. Helped
basically.
really keep the whole studio running.
the movie was setting up the studio. We were building the studio as we were building the movie, so everyone was sort of involved in how the movie came to be.
I always like the way the last thing you ever see in a movie is criminal prosecution. That was a great thing.
Especially in a Bible movie.
Yeah.
But Sandy Ravens really worked hard at putting that crew list together for the credits, and
It's amazing how difficult it is to
He's very
actually make sure
generous.
that everybody gets mentioned in the right place, and also checking with every single member of the crew to make sure that the spelling of their names is correct. And
Yeah.
that in itself is weeks of work.
and she was just very generous in her wanting to make sure that everyone got the credit.